Welcome to PADNET Presents. I'm your host, Derek Simpson, and I'm very privileged to say that we have a special show this time because we have the honor of joining us Congresswoman Janice Hahn of the 44th Congressional District in California. And when I was doing research to prepare myself for this particular program, it was like a history lesson. Not only a history lesson here in the city of Long Beach, but about a great family, a great tradition, a noble cause that they've all pursued. And now the Congresswoman takes up that challenge and takes it on our behalf. And she's going to share not only some insight about herself, but about the great things that she's doing on our behalf in Congress. Welcome, Congresswoman.
Thank you, Derek. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure. I mean, as I said, as I was reading some of the information, it was just so impressive. And the first thing I want to talk about is just congratulations on those grandkids. I got 3 granddaughters myself, and grandparents can dote about that every now and then.
Right. Well, I'm ahead of you. I have 5
well,
grandchildren already.
That's
so.
one race I won't try to win then. Now, when I was doing some research, I learned so much. I learned that before all of this, you were a teacher and you were a businesswoman. What was it like being in the classroom then as opposed to what you think teachers face today?
You know, being in the classroom when I was, which was in the 70s, you know, was tough, as it is now. I think our teachers face tremendous challenges with the obstacles that the students have even before they enter the classroom. You know, a lot of our students have tremendous challenges. Many of them are being raised by single mothers. Many of them or grandparents. Yes. Many of them have challenges with being in low-income families, food challenges. So I think our teachers have so much more to try to accomplish with obstacles, again, that they have no control over. So our teachers do a great job.
Now, I would imagine that the fact that you were once a businesswoman yourself gives you great insight as to the challenges of businesses today. How has that helped you, you think?
Well, I think unlike my father and my brother, I really was in the private sector a lot longer before I actually got into public service. So I do think it gave me a sense of the challenges that businesses go through. And now it's perfect because in Congress, I sit on the Small Business Committee in Congress. So it is what I do on a regular basis is meet with small businesses. I've met with many in Long Beach and in my 44th Congressional District to find out what their challenges are. What does the federal government need to do or not do to make sure that our businesses can survive and thrive and hire more people?
You know, it's interesting you say that because prior to taking this position 8 years ago, I worked at Long Beach City College and was the interim director of the Small Business Development Center. And I'm amazed even to this day, that's federally supported, how few business people know about the great resources that you and your colleagues try to make available at the local level. And it just seems that sometimes getting that loan is the worst thing that could have happened because you don't quite know how to manage it properly and strategically once you get it. Would you agree with any of that?
Well, one of the things I've tried to do is bring the federal government to my constituents. You know, I want to make sure that I bring, you know, everything from the Small Business Administration here locally. And I've had them come from Washington, D.C., and we've held workshops on how to access capital. We've held workshops on connecting small businesses in these communities to the Port of Long Beach and Los Angeles, so that they can connect to the international trade industry. So it's kind of one thing I learned from my father, which is make the government work for the people, not the other way around. But you're right, I think some of the biggest challenges are knowing what resources are available. But in terms of accessing a loan, a lot of the small businesses that I talk to have a difficult time accessing capital. They've had a hard time getting those loans. And so I've done a couple things in Congress, just simple things to cut the bureaucratic red tape. I've reduced the paperwork that people have to fill out to apply for a loan.
Which can be intimidating.
Which can be intimidating, particularly for like a mom and pop business who they don't have a full-time accountant or full-time people who are just helping to fill out applications. So I'm trying to make it easier for my small businesses to actually succeed, because I actually believe that it's going to be our small businesses that turn this economy around. And they're the ones that if we can help them succeed, they'll be the first ones to hire a person on staff. And that's how we're going to get our unemployment rate down.
Now, before we go too far into that arena of business and what you're doing politically, you've mentioned your father a couple of times, and though many around LA County know that relationship, your father was County Supervisor Kenny Hahn, and then your brother was also a former mayor of Los Angeles. What influences did they have as you began to pursue your political career in helping you to be the Congresswoman that you are today?
Well, I was actually born into politics. As the story goes, the day my mother brought me home from the hospital when I was born, my dad was in the living room plotting his supervisorial campaign.
Wow.
So I literally was born into this life of politics. And I think for me and my brother, we grew up in such a great family with my dad, as you sort of started this program out by saying, it was a noble cause. My dad thought being in public office, being a public servant, was probably one of the most noble things that you could, rise to. So I watched my dad up close and personal, and I watched a man who was never off duty. You know, there were Saturday mornings in our home in South Central Los Angeles where we would have people knock on our door, and it would be a constituent who had a problem. He would invite them in, sit them down on our living room couch, tell my mother to put another pot of coffee on, and he would listen to their problem, and he would solve their problem. So that was a big inspiration to me. So, when it was time for me to make the move into public service, I knew that that was a job that I wanted to do.
Now, I would imagine you'd have to have your own coffee chain these days for all the people that would come knocking on your door. But how would one approach your offices today? I've had the pleasure of meeting your staff here locally, and I know you have staff in Washington, D.C., but for that person who's sitting at home right now, maybe watching this, and they thought, wow, that sounds pretty cool, how would they go about maybe reaching out to see how they could get this
I have, like I said, people actually do find me when I shop at the grocery store or Starbucks now. I don't do my own coffee, but they meet me in Starbucks. We have an office in San Pedro. Okay. That's our district office. Okay. We also have satellite offices in the city of Carson, in the City Hall. We have satellite office in the City Hall of Compton, Southgate, and right here in Long Beach, we've actually partnered with Al Austin and Rex Richardson, so we actually have office hours in their council offices, because a lot of times people want to access government, they're not really sure. Is this a federal problem, a state problem, local problem? Well, I partnered first with Steve Neal before he moved on, and we decided if people come to the City Hall in Long Beach, let's serve them whatever their problem is. If it's a city problem, you take care of it. If it's federal, I'll take care of it, and make it easy. And the other thing I do, which is really fun, I have Congress on your corner. So I will put a card table up in a parking lot of a grocery store. I've had a card table in a fire station in North Long Beach. I've had a card table in a credit union. No appointment necessary. Come talk to the Congresswoman, and I have my caseworkers there. And so we're able to, right on the spot, try to help people with their problems. And that's what I like to do.
Well, when you're having those Congress on your corners, let us know so that we can be there as well.
I will.
Do you find, this sounds so refreshing, do you find this to be somewhat unique to you, or is this sort of a trend where you see some of your colleagues being more open as well?
I think the public demands this, and I think you'll see more and more members of Congress or other offices really begin to understand that we are here to serve our constituents, and we are here to work together to solve problems. And I just think, if you ever lose touch with the people that elected you,
Right.
then you've really lost touch with why you're in public office. The members of Congress that go to Washington, D.C. and live there and never come home are the ones that aren't going to last long. I come home every weekend. I fly to Washington, D.C. on Mondays and I fly home on Fridays because I know my constituents want to see me. They want to talk to me. And it helps me do a better job when I'm back in Washington, D.C. When I can talk to people, I can hear the stories myself. Then when I go back to Congress, I have some real live stories that I can convince my colleagues in Congress of what we need to be doing.
I was talking to you earlier about my philosophy that I really believe business is all about relationships. Life is about relationships. And I would imagine that just in the little that we've discussed so far, that you're able to form very strong relationships here at this local level, that when you do go back after the weekend, that people really trust that you understand what those needs are.
Well, if they don't feel, if the people don't feel like you're their voice, then they're going to get very disappointed, and that's what you're seeing sometimes in these elections when less and less people are voting. They don't think their vote counts. They need to know that you are their voice, and you're going to fight for them. But it's hard for me to do that if I don't talk to people, if I don't hear for myself what they want me to do. And that's just, I learned that from Kenny Hahn. I think my brother tried to do that. So it's just kind of the brand of politics that we believe works the best.
Yes. Now, when you go back to Washington, D.C., and I know you are on different committees, what might a typical day be like for you on any given week?
Well, a typical day would be, first of all, I have jet lag because it's 3 hours difference in Washington, D.C., so it feels like it's 4 in the morning in Long Beach. But I would usually start the morning with a meeting of such. I actually am a member of the Congressional Prayer Breakfast. Oh, wow. So at 8 a.m., I meet with Republicans and Democrats, and we spend an hour together, and we try to form friendships and relationships around.
How is that working?
Well, it's hard for me sometimes to pray with people you disagree with, but you know what? It's good for me. Because it's easy to pray with people who think like you. Right. It's much more difficult to love someone who disagrees with you politically, but that's probably been one of the best things. Then we usually have committee meetings, committee hearings. I'm on small business, also transportation and infrastructure. I'm on that committee. And many times we have subcommittee meetings. So I'm on the subcommittee for the Coast Guard. So sometimes we have hearings on how the Coast Guard is operating, what the budget is. And then we have votes. So we go to the Capitol, to the House floor, and we have various votes in the afternoon. Then I usually try to give a speech on the House floor about something that I've learned when I was home in the district, and I'll get up and I'll talk about either somebody or an issue that I want people to hear about. So it's a full day.
It sounds like it, and it sounds like also that very easily something that someone talked to you about on Congress on the Corner could have that same conversation relayed to the entire United States Congress very easily.
Absolutely.
That's powerful.
Absolutely. And I take those stories at Congress on Your Corner, and I turn them into legislation. Wow. I turn them into a House floor speech to remind my colleagues what the American people are thinking and are saying. Right. So yeah, that's how I get empowered, is meeting with my constituents.
Yeah, I just think that we should come back and talk more about that. We're going to take a quick break.
Okay.
And when we come back, I'm going to ask the Congresswoman to share a very special story about her father that I've learned about.
They have offered me opportunities. They allow me to utilize equipment that they have. I get to practice more so than I would with the supplies that I have, with the equipment that I have.
I'm learning how to work again with more people and how to actually work in the actual studio and working with the cameras and hands-on.
I remember they said like LAMP as in leadership. You know, I learned a little bit about how to become a leader, as well as like, you know, communicating with the people I work around with.
You know, after being here, you know, all the teaching, all the skills I've been learning, it became easy. It's like learning the alphabet. And from like, you know, we start from the bottom and then we go up. We start learning all these new skills. Things that we thought that it was, you know, really hard becomes easy.
Welcome back to PADNET Presents. I'm your host, Derek Simpson, and before we went to break, we were speaking with Congresswoman Janice Hahn, and it's a pleasure to talk with her about so many things, from being a grandmother, such as I'm a grandfather, to being in Congress and what it takes to really be successful there and how she represents all of us in her district. One of the stories that I found most impressive about her and her family in doing my research was the story about 1962. A plane lands at LAX, and off steps Dr. Martin Luther King, one of the greatest figures in U.S. history, if not world history. And not one local, state, or federal official from Los Angeles went to the airport to meet him, except one person, and that person was?
My father, Supervisor Kenneth Hahn.
Wow.
Yeah, this was a great story, and of course, you know, it was something that probably molded me, changed me, inspired me, probably more than anything, any political lesson that my father taught me. Of course, you remember this was in the early 60s. This is when, you know, the civil rights movement was brewing. This is the Montgomery bus boycott was happening. This was in the South. Of course, they were spraying hoses on people and sicking the dogs on the children. And this was, and of course, I didn't really realize how courageous it was of my father until many years later. But there was a preacher where Dr. King was speaking that night at Victory Baptist Church, and he called all the elected officials, said, wouldn't it be nice if someone greeted Dr. King on his first visit to Los Angeles? And you know, everyone was busy, everyone had a scheduling conflict, some of them didn't even return the phone call. But when he got to my dad, he said, would you consider greeting Dr. King on his first visit to Los Angeles? And my father said, I would be honored. And so he went to the airport, he took a photographer with him, he always did that. And there's this great photo of Dr. King coming down the steps of a United Airlines plane. That's when you could go out to the tarmac and greet someone.
You can still do that in Long Beach, by the way.
That's true, you can. That's true. Good plug for Long Beach Airport.
There you go.
And he greeted Dr. King, and then he put Dr. King in his car.
Wow.
And he drove him, they were killing time till evening church services. And he drove him around the 2nd Supervisorial District, drove him to Watts, and then he took him downtown Los Angeles to the Hall of Administration building, took him into his office, gave him a cup of coffee, and he had probably over 2 hours alone with Dr. Martin Luther King. Now, the way my dad likes to tell the story is that while they were together, Dr. King talked about his hopes for this country and his hopes for America. And of course, my father likes to believe that was his I Have a Dream speech that he heard first. But that's the way we were told that story. But after Dr. King was assassinated, and my father was building the hospital in South Los Angeles, he knew that he wanted to name that after Dr. King. And he called Mrs. King at home, Coretta Scott King at home, and he said, "Mrs. King, you probably don't know who I am, but I'd like to name this hospital after your husband." And she stopped him. She said, "Oh no, I know who you are." She said, "When my Martin came home, he couldn't stop talking about how nice this white official was to him."
Wow, that's powerful. That's powerful. Many people don't know that story. And growing up in Mobile in those 60s, although I was very young at that age, by the time I was able to know what was going on, it changed you. It changed the way you looked at the world. It changed the way you looked at the people around you. I didn't even attend school with anyone that didn't look like me until the 7th grade.
Right.
And so to hear that story is very powerful.
And again, for me, I was a teenager, so I, barely a teenager, I think I was a preteen, but it really wasn't until about 3 years ago when I went with the Congress on the Civil Rights pilgrimage. We went to Selma and Birmingham.
Oh, really? Okay.
And then, I think I finally realized how controversial Dr. King was and what a political liability for white public officials to be seen with him, to be associated with him. Many people who seemed sympathetic to him lost their businesses and were also attacked and harassed. So there was a lot of courage that my father showed, and I didn't really even realize it at that time. But really, that was who he was. He knew right away, and he even said towards the end of his life, when people would ask him, who was the most important people that he ever met, he would always say he thought Dr. King was probably one of the most important and meaningful people in America that he'd ever met.
Now, I know that one of the things that I read as well is that you talk about never letting anything stop you from standing up for justice. Would you say that a lot of that comes from that experience as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. And then, of course, my father, for the majority of his political career, represented a majority African American district. And so I learned the lessons of standing up for the people you represent, even when it's not popular or even when it's not, the thing to do. My father always stood up for the people that he served, and it took courage. Took political courage.
Before you arrived for this particular interview, we had a board meeting at Long Beach Community Action Partnership, and one of my board members, Mr. Bill Barnes, who you met earlier, talked about that very thing. About Kenny used to come to the hood. He used to be there helping and learning, and in Watts and in places where I would imagine it wasn't a popular place to be, but he cared, and that seems to transcend not only what he did, but very clear in the conversation that we've shared so far. I know that one of the things as a community action agency is that we help families move from poverty to self-sufficiency. And I read that you said you believe that there should never be a class termed working poor.
Right. It's unbelievable to me in our society today in 2014 that someone could work full-time and hard and be poor. I hope that one day we can eradicate that characterization from our language, the working poor. Of course, that was one of the things Dr. King was working on, was ending poverty. But I fight very hard to make sure people have a livable wage, and I'm fighting to raise the minimum wage. I think a lot of people don't realize that the minimum wage, is so low. It's like $7.25, the federal minimum wage. And the minimum wage is not really for teenagers anymore. There's a lot of people who are raising their families on the minimum wage, and that's not giving anybody dignity or respect. So one of the things I'm fighting for nationally is to raise the minimum wage.
Now, if I remember correctly, I believe that the minimum wage was initiated maybe back in those 60s, and that it was primarily just based on food costs, not on the cost of living necessarily. And here in LA County, we all know just how expensive it is. I think a self-sufficient wage would be more like $15.41 an hour. And yet we have poverty standards. being maybe $11,000 a year for one person, or $22,000, $23,000 for a family of four. That's not living. That's just barely surviving.
That's barely surviving. And I know
Yes.
when I was on the city council in Los Angeles, we passed a living wage. We called it a living wage, a wage you can live on.
Right.
A minimum wage is the minimum
Right.
that we would compensate someone for,
Right.
for a minimum job. But no one can live on $7.25 an hour. And I know the president is pushing $10.10.
Right.
But I agree with you. I think $15 is a livable wage. And once you give people more money for their wage, you're going to see more money come back into our economy.
Right.
It's going to have a ripple effect. It's going to be
Right.
good for our economy. And I know people are nervous about raising the minimum wage, and businesses are afraid. But when I talk to businesses, what they want are more customers who can spend money in their businesses.
Right.
That's what they want. And the more we can pay somebody a minimum wage, the higher the minimum wage, that money's going to come back to us in so many ways. And maybe some of these parents would be able to only have one job instead of having
Instead of
two
three.
jobs or
Yeah.
three jobs. And I think that would be so important for the dignity and respect of everyone who lives in Los Angeles County.
And I think it takes away from the quality of life of the family too, because if you have that, whereas a parent may have been home after work to be with the children, and I know we'll talk in a moment about your gang initiatives and your focus there, but if that parent has to work that second job, that means that they're not there to be supportive of the child and provide the guidance and the insight and the preventative maybe measures that you believe in. And I wonder, it sounds so logical as we sit here and talk about it, but then you get to Washington, D.C., and it seems like things don't always work logically. What do you find to be most frustrating, if anything, about how you try to go from what sounds like a great idea to all of a sudden just being so frustrated that
Come to
nothing's
find out,
happening?
common sense is not that common.
It's not.
Is what I'm finding. But yeah, it's very frustrating to hear these stories, understand these stories, and then go back to Washington, D.C. and find the partisan gridlock happening and being unable to move any agenda forward. So that's frustrating for me. I grew up in nonpartisan politics, and it was always about working together, trying to find common solutions to solve people's problems. So that's a little bit frustrating to me, but I'm doing my best to make friends on the other side of the aisle so that hopefully some of these initiatives will be passed long term.
Right. Well, when we come back from the next break, I'd like to get more into some of those initiatives, some of those things that maybe you've been working on that you're proud of, or some of the things that are coming up, so that we here can be supportive, not only in Long Beach, but at PADNET, to make sure that we hear enough about the bad things and all the fighting. Let's hear about the good things as well. So we hope you're enjoying this conversation. I know I am. And when we return, we'll join Congresswoman Janice Hahn for more insight on her initiatives in Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us on PADNET Presents.
It's very pet friendly. Everybody has a dog in Long Beach. It's Dog City.
Well, there's everything to do here. You got the Pike, you got Queen Mary, you got the beaches, you got paddle boarding, surfing. You go half a mile that way, you got surfing, you got downtown.
I just think it's the most incredible, most beautiful, most unique city, which has so much to offer. So I love it here and I'll never leave.
I'd like the variety. And one day we could be working on filming a TV show, talk show here in the studio. Other days we could be taking some of the equipment out in the field and filming something out there. We could be editing.
It's been cool to work in the studio and all that and learning about lighting, audio, and camera work. I think that working for PADNET or being an intern has been really great. If you're looking for an internship, PADNET would be a great place to start.
Welcome back to PADNET Presents. I'm Derek Simpson, your host, and we've just been enjoying our time with Congresswoman Janice Hahn, who's taken time out of her busy schedule to join us here on PADNET and talk to us about what's going on both here locally, and if you haven't heard about Congresswoman on the Corner, definitely call her office and find out more about that. And we've been talking about her family history in politics, and now we want to move to her relationships with our local current sitting politicians. I had the honor, Congresswoman, to being called the night after the elections by Robert Garcia, who's now our mayor, to say, Derek, what are you doing tomorrow? And I'm like, I'm going to work. And he's like, well, I would like for you to be on my transition team. And we're going to have a press conference, and there's maybe 17 other people that will be joining you. And it was like immediately, within 24 hours, he reached out to this diverse group of us to embrace us and have us come in and sort of be an advisory committee for several months. What is your relationship, and what are your thoughts about our new mayor?
Well, I've known Robert Garcia for several years. I was really thrilled when he was elected mayor of Long Beach, and I just attended his first 100 days speech last week at the convention center, and I was just thinking to myself, man, if there was anyone out there who had any doubts about someone this young leading a city the size of Long Beach, all doubts would be put aside. He was so articulate in really talking about his vision, talking about what he was going to do for Long Beach, and really being so optimistic. You know, the past is behind us. What are we going to look forward to as the future of Long Beach? It was a very exciting speech, and so I'm very happy to work with him on many issues. In fact, he and I met at the Grant Child Development Center earlier to talk about universal preschool and why that matters, and why he has that vision for Long Beach, and why I have that vision really for our whole country, is universal preschool, and why it matters to begin educating our kids as early as 4. So he's dynamic, he's smart, and he is really making a name for himself.
Now, I know that we also have, of the 9 council districts, I think we had 5 seats that turned over, and 3 of those were women. And we had the honor of having them on the set and just talking about that whole experience. But I understand that you also have had an opportunity to meet them as well. How did they impress you as new councilwoman?
Well, of course, I always think we need more women in politics.
So does our producer, Lisa.
That's good. We are underrepresented in many local, state. We're underrepresented in Congress. Right. So I love seeing women get elected. On the city council in Los Angeles, there's only 1 woman out of 15. Oh, wow. So Long Beach is doing much better. So I heard that the women council members would get together regularly and go out for dinner. So I called them a couple Friday nights ago and asked if I could join them. So I joined the 4 of them for dinner here in Long Beach, and really was impressed with their ability to work together to solve problems for Long Beach. And it was clear to me that they don't always agree on everything, but they are going to have a relationship, a respect for each other, that even when they disagree, they're going to figure out how to find common ground for the people of Long Beach. And I think that's true for women in general. I think we're good at consensus building. I think we're good at really trying to solve problems and not always worried about who gets the credit. So I think women bring a different perspective and have a different way of governing. And so I'm really pleased with their leadership, and I look forward to working with them and going out to dinner with them again.
There you go. Now, speaking of our newly elected officials, I understand that you were very supportive of an initiative that Councilman Rex Richardson initiated, along with Megan Kerr in the 9th District. Would you care to share a little bit more about your thoughts on that? It's the whole village.
The whole village initiative. Again, I'm so impressed with the elected officials, the public servants here in Long Beach. Here's 2 people who are new at politics. Rex Richardson, Megan Kerr. This is the first time they've been elected. He's a council member. She's a school board member. And again, they decided to come together and launch this whole village initiative in North Long Beach, which is geared towards helping young men and boys, particularly of color, and having positive outcomes in their life. They're going to work on tutoring, mentoring, after-school program, job training. They want to change the direction for many young people who sometimes lose their way in high school. And I just was impressed, again, that you have a school board member and a city council member. You know, typically those two legislative bodies don't work together.
Right.
But you know what? The people we serve, they don't care whether you're a city council member, they don't care whether you're a school board member, a Congress member. They have an issue with their schools, they have an issue with their young people. They want all of us to come together and work together. So I joined them when they launched this at their press conference, and then they have a whole task force of faith-based leaders, business leaders, labor leaders who are going to help them really work on making this a successful initiative. So I was just pleased to join them, and it was a good example of how, the people want their elected officials to work together.
Now, you have many cities within your district. Do you find Long Beach to be that unique in terms of the things that we're discussing, or do you find this to be a trendsetter, or do you find this to just be a wave that's happening both in your district and nationally of at a grassroots level, politicians crossing the lines to come together?
I think Long Beach is going to lead the way on this. I think Long Beach is going to be a trendsetter. And you heard Robert Garcia in his speech give kudos to the city council members. A mayor doesn't always get along with the city council. And you could already tell he was giving them respect and dignity because he came from the city council, so he understands it. But that doesn't always happen in cities. So I think Long Beach is really going to set the course for other cities. Although I do know that President Obama was the one who launched My Brother's Keeper, and he challenged cities and communities across this country to come together and find ways to help our young men achieve success. And I know City of Compton is one of the cities in my congressional district. They're also working to do something like Rex Richardson and Megan Kerr launched. But they did it quickly, they did it well, and I know theirs is going to be a success.
Now, if we jump to your national agenda for a moment, I know that one of the things that I read about was the National Freight Network Trust Fund Act of 2014. That's a mouthful, but I know being a port city such as we are and a major international gateway for America and the world, can you explain to us what that's about and why it's important?
One of the things I found when I went back to Congress as a freshman in a special election 3 years ago, that really no one on the national level was talking about our ports. And I went into a Congress in 2011 where we were talking about the economy and jobs, and no one was relating that to our ports. Now, coming from Long Beach and Los Angeles, we know the value of our ports.
Absolutely.
Long Beach and Los Angeles combined, over 40% of all the goods that come into this country come through our ports. We know that there's over 500,000 jobs in our region that are tied directly to our ports, and sometimes I think we take it for granted. So I decided to really take that issue of our ports and educate my fellow members in Congress about why it matters. And so I created a bipartisan caucus around our ports. There's about 90 members of Congress right now, Republicans and Democrats.
Wow.
Some of them don't even have a port. And they have joined my port caucus. I brought them out here to Long Beach and let them tour the port of Long Beach and Los Angeles so they can see when they go back to their districts why it matters to invest in our ports. But I think for me and for all of us, we need to be aware that we can't take this for granted. There's a lot of jobs and there's a lot of our economy that depends on the success and the global competitiveness of our ports. So my bill finds a way to fund The projects, like the Gerald Desmond Bridge, like more on-dock rail, like more roads, bridges, highways, things that will support moving these goods across our country so that there is no reason for this cargo to go to the East Coast or go to Canada or go to Mexico. We need to be prepared to always be the leader in moving this cargo. So that's been actually a fun issue for me. I'm kind of known as the freight queen back in DC.
Now, I know that you also not are only interested in it moving, but you are also a big advocate of it being moved with clean air and the environment being in mind as well.
Absolutely. You know, this is our economic engine,
Right.
But we shouldn't choke on it.
There you go.
And frankly, our ports are the largest polluter in the region. So I have been working on cleaning our ports, and Long Beach Port has been a leader as a green port, and Los Angeles as well. We're working on clean trucks to move this cargo. Our ships, we're looking to have them plug in so that they don't burn this bunker fuel when they're in berth. But there's no reason that you have to make a choice between clean air and good jobs. We can have it both, and one of the things we're finding, the more we mandate that those ports are clean, guess what happens? Other jobs, other industries crop up to support that environmental initiative. We have Port Tech LA over in San Pedro that is an incubator for green businesses to support cleaning the port. So the more we stand up for what we know is right, we don't need to worry that business is going to go somewhere else or we're going to lose jobs. We're going to create jobs, and we're going to give more people an opportunity to test their technology to keep cleaning our port. So it goes hand in hand.
Now, I know that we're running close to being out of time, but when we come back from our next break, I would like for you to speak to the fact as well that though we may complain about a lot of trucks on the freeway, really you were a part of an initiative to, as I understand it, more than 40% of goods are now moved on nights and weekends.
Yes.
So even though things happen during the day, it could be a lot worse.
That's true.
An amazing woman, an amazing congressperson working on our behalf, Congresswoman Janice Hahn. When we return, we'll have a few more thoughts from her before we end this episode of PADNET Presents.
Here live in the mix at the Pacific Ballroom here at the Long Beach Arena.
I think it's one of the most spectacular things we've had in Long Beach for years and years and years and years.
This space looks like you could do anything.
I think it's already created a buzz and an action and excitement for the downtown area.
Welcome back to PADNET Presents. I'm your host, Derek Simpson, and as we said earlier, we're here and privileged to have join us Congresswoman Janice Hahn. Before we left for break, we were talking about how important our ports are, and I started to mention to you, Congresswoman, that I had also read that you were part of an initiative to move the traffic from the port to more at night and on weekends, and over 40% of that traffic is in. And at 7:30 in the morning, when someone's leaving downtown Long Beach to get up to the 405, they may not realize that, but it could be a lot worse.
You're right, exactly. Well, it came to my attention, and I heard again from my constituents that this traffic on the 710, the 110, the 5, the 60. I mean, it was clogged because our ports were really sort of operating from 8 to 5.
Right.
And it was about 2002 I went overseas to Hong Kong, Singapore, Shanghai, and I saw these ports work 24/7. And I came back and I thought, you know what, we're going to be getting more cargo. These ships are going to be larger, the trucks are going to be bigger. What are we doing to prepare for that? We're not going to be able to accommodate that on our roadways. And one jackknife truck on the 710 at 3 in the afternoon, the whole freeway shuts down for 4 hours. And I was also hearing from the truck drivers. And many of our truck drivers at that time were only getting paid by the load, when they dropped something off or when they picked something up. Many of them were struggling to feed their families. But in our traffic, they could make maybe one round trip a day. And that was not enough for them. And so I sort of saw this perfect storm happening. And so I pitched the idea of moving cargo off-peak. Well, everybody said it couldn't be done, and we've tried that before. I said, well, the difference is we have public opinion on our side now. We have the public who want us to solve this problem. So Alan Lowenthal, who at the time was up in Sacramento in the state legislature, and I both worked on figuring out a way to move this cargo off-peak. So Pier Pass came into being, and again, people thought it would never work. Now I think it's actually more than 40%.
Wow.
I think it's closer to 50%. Of the cargo is now moved in the evenings and on the weekends. And so until we build bigger bridges, until we widen the freeways, we need to use our infrastructure smarter.
Yes.
And by the way, the truckers don't really like to be on the road with us either. They think we don't know how to drive. And many times some of those accidents happen because a smaller car doesn't realize when they slam on their brakes that a big rig carrying
takes a lot longer for them
to stop, and that's part of why we have accidents. So I'm really pleased that that's a great example of me bringing, but I brought everybody together to solve that problem. I brought the ports together, the labor together, the businesses, the warehouses. I brought together Walmart and Costco and Target, and I said, let's figure this out. And we really came up with a good way to do that. So that was a great example of coming together, and it's great having Alan Lowenthal now
I was about to ask
joining
about
me
him.
in Congress. He's such a great legislator and such a good man, and I love having him in Congress. And so Long Beach is lucky to have both Alan and I representing them and working so closely together, and we pretty much agree on everything. We check with each other before we cast a vote, because we just want to make sure we're both always thinking of Long Beach in the same way.
Yeah, and I know that he's been here on this show, and we've been honored to have him and just talk about things. And in fact, his office is represented on our board of directors, and I just find him to be very genuine, much as I find you to be, and it's just such an honor to meet you. Speaking of honors to meet someone, I was telling one of the teens that, the guest that we are about to have come in is just 1 degree away from the most powerful man in the world today, and that's President Barack Obama. You have had the honor of not only meeting with him, but working with him. Can you just share some of the stories and insight about maybe the first time you met and how that relationship is going forward?
Well, it's very interesting, and you'll find this interesting, that the very first time I met him, he was running for president. And one of his first campaign appearances was in Los Angeles. I was on the city council, so all the city council members were there to greet him and encourage him. And I'm sure he was briefed in the green room. But when he met me, he went to Occidental College, so he was in the Los Angeles area for a while. But when he met me, he shook my hand and he looked me in the eye and he said, "Your father, Janice, was a legend in the African American community." So that started our relationship, and it made it very special that he too, knew of Kenny Hahn. And I will tell you, every time I'm with him, every time I am in a meeting with them, or we're always invited to the White House picnic or the holiday party in the White House.
How do I get on that invitation?
I know, right? But he's so genuine and down to earth, and Michelle Obama is also so pleasant and accommodating. So it's been a real thrill to me. And by the way, I never get tired of being in the same room with the President of the United States. And I have fought a couple times to get on that aisle for the State of the Union address, because I want all my friends back home to see me, and he always shakes my hand and gives me a hug. And he's a man who really cares for this country. I've seen him age in these years since he's been president, because the weight of the world is
literally
the weight of the world is on him. And not to mention, he's had to work with a very contentious Congress. He's had to work with a Congress that wasn't always accommodating his agenda. So he's had a very difficult time, but he's a good man, and I can't think of anybody I'd rather serve under as a member of Congress than Barack Obama.
It's a powerful statement, and a testament to his leadership and to yours as well. When we think about the year to come, if we just start there, because midterm elections will be over, and we're looking at now the whole cycle starting again for the next president, whoever that might be.
Whoever she might be.
Whoever she might be. There you go. Are you running?
No, I'm not thinking of me.
But when you think about that, though, I mean, it's here. I mean, I can't believe the holidays are upon us, basically. What are some of the things that we might look forward to here at home that you see on the horizon that maybe we can't see, or that maybe we can be supportive of in helping that agenda?
Right. Well, I definitely think raising the minimum wage will be a big issue that I'm pretty hopeful the Congress next year takes up. I think comprehensive immigration reform is going to be the issue and the battleground, and I think that's something the majority of Americans support. They are ready for us. They know our immigration system in this country is broken, and it doesn't work, and it doesn't work for families. So that's something I think we're going to tackle, and if people really have a feeling about that, you need to really have your voice heard on that. And I do believe it's time. The Senate passed a year and a half ago a comprehensive immigration reform bill. The House, where I work, has yet to take it up. So that's the big issue, I think, raising the minimum wage, comprehensive immigration reform. Our transportation bill we need to reauthorize so that we can make sure we continue to fund our highways, our roads, our bridges. So some of those issues hopefully will get done. I don't think anything's going to get done between now and the end of the year.
Well, I just had the pleasure of flying into LAX not long ago, and I found it strange that at 11 o'clock at night, guys were almost hitting me in the head with planks, and they had scaffolding going up and lots of construction. And as I understand it, you were one of the loudest voices in modernizing LAX. When you talk about coming back home here from that national agenda, how proud of you are the way that's coming along, because that's part of transportation as well.
Absolutely. Well, when I was on the City Council, I headed up the committee on the Los Angeles City Council for Trade, Commerce, and Tourism, and so the airport was under my committee, and I just felt we had an aging airport. I also felt like our concessions were bad. The food was bad, the shopping was bad, and more importantly, we were not going to be prepared for the next generation of aircraft. Just like at the port, we have to be ready for those large ships that are going to carry, 18,000 containers. We had to be ready at LAX for those big planes, the A380 and the Dreamliner, the Boeing Dreamliner, and our gates were not going to be ready. So I really worked hard to push that modernization plan for the traveling passengers experience, but also to make sure that those airplanes continue to come to LAX. Just like cargo, they can go elsewhere.
Yes,
and with the airplanes that now don't have to stop for refueling, they don't have to necessarily come to LAX. So I wanted that to be a good experience for passengers. Customs and Border Protection, those agents, we're working to get more at LAX so that when somebody does spend 15 hours on a plane and comes through our customs at LAX, we want that to be a pleasant experience, to go quickly, so that they know that Los Angeles is a welcoming place. And every plane that lands adds to our economy in this entire region. So I'm proud of that work.
When you talk about proud, one of the things that Long Beach Community Action Partnership is known for as a community action agency is the Leadership Academy Mentoring Program that we created, or LAMP is the acronym for our teens. And you've had the opportunity to meet some of those teens as we prepared for this program. We only have a minute left, but what would you say to those who are watching about being supportive in a positive way of the youth in our community?
Well, we need to support our young people, and I've been impressed with the young people that I've met here on the set today. Very impressed. But we also need to give them skills to pay their bills.
Right.
And many of our vocational classes are not in our schools anymore. And I know a lot of people my age who took a class in high school that ended up in a great career for them.
Right.
Not everyone's going to go to college.
Right.
We want to prepare those students who do, but there's a lot of jobs out there that we need to prepare our young people for, and the mentoring and tutoring and the classes that I'm understanding you're helping with here are exactly what our young people need, and we need to support those programs for all of our futures.
Thank you so much, and we're out of time, and I've just learned so much. I hope those that have been watching have learned a great deal. The key for me is that you're so genuine, and you really care, and you take that sincerity to Washington, D.C., and God bless you for doing that, and the battles that you fight on our behalf. I hope that those of you who have been watching this particular program have enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. We look forward to having the Congresswoman back in the future to share new things that are going on. Until then, please take care of yourselves and take care of those that you care for in your family and in your community. And join us again on PADNET Presents. I've been your host, Derek Simpson, and it's been my honor.